Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're still here, but again, you're probably just waiting for your flight. So anyway, we'll start our talk today, phytoestrogens and cognitive function, data from observational and treatment studies. So what is phytoestrogen? Phytoestrogens are a class of chemicals that resemble estrogen, but not identical to estrogens. And phytoestrogens are probably the most bioactive component of soy. And phytoestrogens have been linked to lower incidence of certain cancers and heart health and relieving menopausal symptoms and potentially lowering the risk of osteoporosis. So now you can see the schematic representation of phytoestrogen subclass. You can see that among all these variety of phytoestrogens, the most primary kind is isoflavones. So today when we talk about phytoestrogens, we'll mainly be talking about isoflavones and its supplement. And now we're talking about isoflavone, and soy is the most potent phytoestrogen by far. And soy is the cornerstone of a traditional Asian diet. It has been widely believed that the consumption of soy food reduces the risk of certain diseases. However, in Western countries, soy still plays a minor dietary role despite it representing a good source of protein, dietary fiber, and a variety of phytochemicals. So now we're talking about soy phytoestrogen. And among soy phytochemicals, soy isoflavone have attracted considerable attention because of their healthful effects. You can see soy isoflavones bind to the estrogen receptor and affect estrogen-mediated processes. And isoflavones have been observed to have several beneficial effects on your cardiovascular health. The FDA has approved isoflavones on heart treatments. So what is good for the heart is what is good for the brain, and Eve will talk about that later. And the neuroprotective role of phytoestrogens are mainly resulted from the evidence from rodent and cell culture studies. And it is found that the phytoestrogen intake is associated with reduced neuron loss and improved hippocampal learning ability and anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. But however, there's a great deal of controversy surrounding soy foods, mostly due to their isoflavones, which can bind to estrogen receptor and potentially affect your thyroid hormones. So now when we review human studies, although previous findings in rodent and cell culture studies show some promise for the neuroprotective role of phytoestrogen, however, further work is still needed to determine the feasibility of phytoestrogen. So here let's review some observational studies and randomized control trials demonstrating either a positive, to demonstrate the positive effect of phytoestrogen on cognition. Here is the study conducted in 2009, the soy isoflavone supplementation in men. It is found out in this study, isoflavone supplementation in men significantly improved spatial working memory in men. We all know that sex differences in cognitive ability are a widely studied and a controversial topic. Women have consistently performed better on tests such as language ability, like word fluency, spelling, or grammatical usage, and certain memory tests, such as verbal recall tests, while as men appear to be superior in mechanical and visual spatial tests. So in this study, we find out that isoflavone supplementation in men improved the spatial working memory here without being detrimental to the performance of visual spatial processing there below. And so it's an interesting finding and makes us wonder what could be the gender differences in this association between isoflavone or phytoestrogen and cognition. However, as of now, So the neuroprotective effect of phytoestrogen on cognition or brain function is mainly reviewed through these two aspects. First of all, it's associated with the regulation of cerebral vascular blood flow, and also it's associated with the modulation of neurotransmitter systems. However, in recent decades, it has been brought up that there are some negative effects of soil supplements, and it's mainly as below several aspects. So first of all, soybeans contains large quantities of natural toxins or anti-nutrients. And first among them are potent enzyme inhibitors that block the action of trypsin and other enzymes needed for protein digestion. And second, these inhibitors are not deactivated during cooking and processing. So in this past study, they find out that test animals fed these inhibitors developed enlargement and pathological conditions of the pancreas, including cancer. And soybeans also contain hemagglutinin, a clot-promoting substance that causes the red blood cells to clump together. And besides this, 99% of soy product is genetically modified and among the highest contamination by pesticides of any of our food. And soybeans are high in phytic acid, a substance that blocks the uptake of our essential minerals, including magnesium, copper, iron, and especially zinc in the intestinal tract. And also, soy isoflavones demonstrate toxicity in estrogen-sensitive tissues. And soy food have a high concentration of goitrogen, which should block your production of thyroid hormones. So after understanding these potential negative sides of soy products, let's review some studies showing no or negative effect of phytoestrogen on cognition. In this study conducted in 2005, the purpose was to examine the relation between the dietary intake of phytoestrogen and cognitive function in healthy postmenopausal women consuming a Western diet. So they conducted this community-based survey among 394 postmenopausal women, and isoflavones together with lignin is another form of phytoestrogen, but it's not from soy, it's mainly from oil seeds and broccoli and berries, and so we will not talk about lignans today. So the isoflavones and lignin intake was calculated from a validated food frequency questionnaire, which I will mention later, and cognitive function was evaluated using the mini-mental state examination. So during the survey, the isoflavone intake was recorded if there is any of the below, the beans, peas, nuts, or mainly soy products like soya food and soya milk intake was recorded. And they find out that isoflavone intake is not associated with cognition, although they find the positive correlation between the total phytoestrogen and cognition, but it's mainly compensated by the lignans intake, not the isoflavones. And this study conducted in 2007 among postmenopausal women, they used not only the MMSE, but also other specific domain-based cognitive tests to test your memory and processing speed and executive function. However, it suggests that among these more postmenopausal women, there's no apparent relationship between dietary isoflavone intake and cognition. And in some Asian studies conducted by our group, we find out the high tofu intake is actually associated with worse memory in elderly Indonesian men and women. So this study was conducted in 2008. It's a part of the study of elderly memory impairment and associated risk factors in Indonesia. So a total of 719 participants from rural and urban area in Indonesia, these three regions here, they were recruited and they aged from 52 to 99 years of age, and the majority are women. And this is the food frequency questionnaire. We ask about like how much do you consume the following food items. There are rice and bread and other than fruit juice, green vegetable, red vegetable, and soy food, and white meat and red meat. So we ask them, do you eat it daily? If yes, then we'll continue to ask, how many times a day do you consume this item? And if the participant answers no, then we ask that how many days in a week do you consume these items, or how many days in a month do you consume these items? And we calculate their weekly intake of food. For example, if you contain it on a daily basis, and for all 3 meals, it will be 3 times 7 days, 21 servings per week. So this is how we record the information. And the data collection was conducted in 3 regions in Indonesia: West, Central, and Northwest Java. It's conducted in a mixed population with participants recruited from both rural and urban area, and with a mixed race group also. And over 60% have never worked in their life, and 80% have at least finished secondary school. So the results shows that the weekly tofu intake was associated with worse memory function. You can see from this figure here, there is this linear decreasing in participants' cognitive function and memory performance, along with the increasing intake of tofu product. However, they also find out that tempeh intake had an independent positive association with better memory function. Tempeh is another type of soy food, which Eve will also talk about later. And besides these 2 main findings, we find out that fruit is positive correlated with your cognitive function, which is actually quite expected. However, we find out the green vegetable weekly intake is associated with worse memory function. We'll talk about that later also. And our research group conducted a follow-up visit, and we follow up with participants from this specific group where there was the most significant negative effect on soil product on cognition. And in prior to their follow-up visit, they were actually told to eat less tofu and substituted with tempeh, which was found to be positively correlated with memory function. And the main findings are there is a positive linear association of both tofu and tempeh consumption with immediate recall, but only in younger elderly with an average age of 65 years. However, in older elderly, the earlier negative association between tofu and immediate recall that was reported in 2008 study was no longer significant. And similar study was conducted in China's Shanghai Mental Health Center. It's also a community-based study with a total of 571 participants aged from 50 to 95 years age, and majority are still women. And we use exactly the same methodology. We use the food frequency questionnaire, and we use the Hopkins verbal learning test to test their cognitive function. So you can see the results are almost identical to what we found in 2008. There's a increasing weekly tofu intake is associated with worse cognitive function. And if you notice this figure below, it's almost the same as the pattern we showed in 2008 study. And because earlier in 2011 study, we find out that there seems to be an age-dependent effect, while in younger elderly people, there seems to be a positive correlation. In older elderly, there seems to be a null or neutral or negative trend. So we also stratified the analysis according to the age groups, 68 years of age as the median age in our sample. And then we find out the weekly tofu intake is associated with higher risk of having possible dementia, but only in older age group, among those above 68 years of age. And if you can look down below a little bit, we can find out that weekly green vegetable intake is actually associated with lower possible dementia risks. It means that it still plays a protective role. However, if you look down the 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one, being vegetarian is significantly increase the risk of having possible dementia. So it seems that the green vegetable intake is still plays a positive role in your cognitive function, but being vegetarian, it gives you a bigger exposure to possible dementia risk. And in this study conducted in 2000, in Hawaii, Honolulu, Asian aging study, we find exactly similar results. The left upper graph shows that the tofu intake is associated with cognitive impairment, and the right corner one, it shows that increasing tofu intake is associated with low brain weight. And however, it still remains uncertain if this self-reported isoflavone intake represents the actual intake of genistein, because we use the food frequency questionnaire. It's a self-report test, so we decide that in this study, we measure individuals' genistein level using saliva levels. And we find similar results. Among younger elderly, phytoestrogen intake shows a positive effect on cognition, whereas in older elderly, the effect disappeared. And the evidence from interventional studies are even more mixed. Overall, you can see that some study that shows with the arrow there, some studies shows the improved cognitive function, and some shows neutral, and some shows declined cognitive function. So overall, while the data is still fragmentary, they more or less indicate the effectiveness of such treatment may be diminished with increasing age after 60. And these above studies are indicative of a critical window of therapeutic opportunity, suggesting that age and/or duration of hormone deprivation adversely affect the beneficial effects of phytoestrogen. And in this interventional study conducted in 2012 in Hawaii, we find out that it's conducted among healthy postmenopausal women, and we find out the long-term dietary soy isoflavone supplementation, it has no effect on global cognition, but it may improve your visual memory. There's still just a trend, but nothing significant. But still, overall, it shows no correlation with your global cognition. So if we can conclude from the above studies that the association between soy consumption and cognition still remains inconclusive, and phytoestrogens consumption only improved cognitive function in less than 50% of the studies, and while all the rest are either no effect or negative effect. So now we talk, why would there be a mixed evidence of the effect of phytoestrogen on cognition? There could be some potential mediating factors. And all the above studies highlight the need to consider all these potential mediating variables for the relationship between phytoestrogen and cognition, including age, gender, ethnicity, and estrogen dosage, and type of food, which Eve will talk about later. And studies which, we find out that studies which report no effect on phytoestrogen on cognition have mainly been carried out in European cohorts with an average low dietary consumption of soy foods. In contrast, investigation of Asian populations with a higher general intake of tofu have shown negative association with cognitive function, especially in those over 65 years of age. And in terms of gender, there seems to be a positive effect of phytoestrogen on men, but not on women. And in terms of dosage, limited data has provided evidence that the effects of phytoestrogen on cognition may be modified by dosage and duration of consumption. Reviewing through the above interventional studies, and the dosage of phytoestrogen ranged from 60 to 200 milligrams per day, and the duration of intervention ranged from 1.5 to 12 months. So there's a big gap in between this duration, dosage duration, and no research has yet to establish the optimal dosage or the duration for intervention for phytoestrogen interventions. And several phytoestrogen treatments intervention have also shown time-limited positive effects on cognition. These findings are consistent with those the other estrogen treatment studies. So, and then when we talk about ethnic difference, I think that we're all aware that we're all aware of the ethnic difference in terms of vascular function and cognitive performance between Asian countries and Western countries. It has been widely studied. And we also find out that even in Asian study between countries, China, Singapore, Japan, there's also difference in terms of their patterns of cognitive profiles and the new dietary profiles. But actually in Singapore, we find this there is even ethnic difference between 3 ethnic groups, the Chinese, Malay, and Indians, the residents in Singapore, because you can find out there's the ethnic difference in terms of cognition, cardiovascular function, even in quality of life. And there's yet any study being conducted in Singapore to investigate the phytoestrogen on cognition. But however, you know that Asia countries, we have a variety of food diet and we eat everything. Well, but in this study, they find out the curry consumption and cognitive function in elderly. It's a pretty interesting study. It find out that even with low or moderate level of curry consumption, and better cognitive function is observed. So it reminds us that maybe in Asian countries, when we study the effect of phytoestrogen on cognition, we might also need to take into consideration a variety of other foods which might also exert a certain level of impact on your body health. And also when we talk about ethnicity, we talk about equals, and equal has estronic activity, but not all human beings can produce equal. The ability to produce equal depends on 2 things, soil and your bacteria. So first of all, soil must contain soil isoflavone, and the amount of and it may contain the certain amount that may influence your equal production. And second of all, the human must have certain strains of bacteria living within the intestine. So we find out in past researches that only about 20 to 30% of the adults from Western countries can produce equal after soy consumption, whereas in Asian countries, 50 to 60% are equal producers. So this might also explain the ethnic difference that we find in previous studies. So in conclusion, whereas translational studies show neuroprotective effect of phytoestrogen, which could alleviate risk of AD progression, the results from human studies are still largely inconsistent. And study of soy consumption and phytoestrogen supplements have focused mostly on postmenopausal women seeking alternatively to estrogen treatments. And there seems to be an age-dependent effect of phytoestrogen supplements. And interventional studies, they support the idea of a window of therapeutic opportunity and the need for studies to identify mechanisms controlling this window in order to extend it. So moving on, for future research, there are several directions we might want to go to and explore. The first of all is the optimal dose at which a positive effect will occur, as well as the toxicity of high doses of isoflavones in human. Because if you can remember, I mentioned earlier, the dosage going across those interventional studies, it ranges from 60 to 2,000 milligrams per day, and nobody was there to establish what is the optimal dosage. And also, the second one, we need to establish the guideline for duration of isoflavone consumption. And also, we need to take into consideration those mediating factors like age, gender, ethnicity, and individual differences in bioavailability and metabolism of isoflavones. And finally, a consensus is needed about methodological standards, because in previous, when we reviewed those studies, some use only the mini-mental state examination, and some use a comprehensive cognitive battery. So we need to decide the type of cognitive test we use, and we need to determine the isoflavone measurements. Some use the self-report food frequency questionnaire, and we also try the saliva samples. And so these kind of validation methodological standards should be utilized in order to make studies more directly comparable across countries and cultures and determine the validity of our findings. And that's the end. So thank you, Professor Alki, and thank you.
We have some time for questions. Does anybody have a question for Shin?
Yeah, I just, in going back to the point about the vegetables and the correlation to green vegetables, do you think that it's because of the chemicals that we find all over the world being used on the vegetables?
I would think almost the same way as you did, because in Asian countries there is a large amount of pesticides being used on these vegetables. So yes, I would think that could be the possible reason. And also, just let me find the slides. You're talking about this, the green vegetable, the intake is negatively. Yes, I would definitely think so. And another thing is that I don't know about Indonesia, but I think that when we read about past literature, we find out there are a certain amount of people, they're pure vegetarians. So based on our Shanghai findings, we find that the green vegetable, it plays a protective role. However, being vegetarian, it gives you a bigger, larger proposal to having possible dementia. So we might think that that could also be a factor. Yeah.
In Indonesia, the pollution is very bad. The green vegetable they eat there is different from the green vegetable we looked at in Shanghai. And they eat something called water spinach, which is put in river water, basically. It grows up in river water, and the river is absolutely black because there is no cleaning of water, there's no proper sewage treatment. So yeah.
Yeah, that remains a problem in Asian countries. Yeah.
But one other question?
I was just wondering, some studies from Western countries, US, Europe, I think are actually giving opposite type of observation, that people following plant-based diet seem to be less prone to undergo dementia, higher cognitive impairment. Well, I don't know, this is what I know based on some regular approach.
You mean they might actually find some positive association? Yes, yes. Yes, but again, it's because the tofu or soy food consumption in Western country still remains not as sufficient. I would say sufficient, not as high as the soy food that's been consumed in Asian country. Because in intervention studies they found mixed evidence, and some really depends on their dosage. If you only take like a 60 milligram or just one serving, like a cup of soy milk or half cup of tofu, I doubt it will have any negative effect, or it might help you to protect you from some certain disease. But if you take tofu or soy food excessively, and you might also take in those toxins and those bad sides of tofu. So it really depends on the dosage. Also the ethnic difference that I mentioned about the equal production, the difference. Yes.
These people are actually below 65 years old.
Yes.
There seems to be a protective.
Yes, but when you're growing older, there seems to be a negative effect. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
One last question.
Just
Impact on sexual functions with these phytoestrogens? Relevant as well. I mean, you have conducted several things.
you mean the intervention study?
Are there any effects on sexual functions?
I would say that it's because those studies we reviewed, they mainly conducted among more postmenopausal women, so we haven't really looked into like the whole age range. But yes, I think it's interesting to look at whether it will affect it.
There's been some work with looking at men, because people were worried about the estrogenic effects of soy in terms of it interfering with testosterone production and hence sexual activity. And that is again very mixed evidence whether it does or doesn't. It doesn't in general seem to, what I know of that literature, but again that's not what we looked at, it doesn't seem to significantly interfere, but it's an interesting point.
Yes.